So I guess everybody wants to hear is the story behind your name because it's quite catchy.
Unique.
Yeah.
So basically, I did, when I first started in the blogging world, I started with a recipe journal blog. And then when we bought the house, I started another blog, which was about doing up the house. And after a few years in, I was talking to a friend who worked in PR, and she was like, you really should find a way to amalgamate the two and make a lifestyle blog. And it was just a case of trying to think of the name of it. And around about that time, where I was working at the time, I had this friend called Kendra, and basically it was one of those workplaces where you didn't have tea bags provided and sugar provided and stuff, so I'd bring it in jam jars. So she always called me JamJarGill, and because she just thought it was cute. So and it kind of turned into a bit of a thing that everyone started calling me it at work. And then when I started planning my wedding, then I had a bit of a jam jar theme as well, because it kind of like organically progressed, because I loved mason jars and I love storage jars. And then the wedding invites I liked at the time had like jars on them. And then it turned out that actually it was a really practical way to display your wedding flowers, because you could display them in jam jars on the aisle where you're walking, but then they could be reused on the tables. Whereas the traditional way of doing it was that you'd have separate flowers for the ceremony to the thing, but that's obviously having to buy extra flowers. So it was a thrifty thing. It was a recycling thing. And I also just thought it was really catchy, and it could potentially be shortened to JJG. If I wanted to progress my brand, as I'm now doing, and doing being a VA now, so I'm kind of calling that JJG VA Services, and that's quite nice and quite catchy as well. So I kind of feel like it's a name which could grow with me. It's got a cute aspect, it's got a recycling aspect, so that's kind of the whole background behind it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great story. Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah. So before we get into all of the brand, I would like to know who are you? Who is Jill?
Am I? Who am I? Who are any of us?
Exactly.
I am a 30-something mum of two. I've got twin boys. I'm married. I live in rural Bedfordshire in England. I blog. I've got a media degree, and I've always liked being a people person, and I've kind of fallen into marketing and communication kind of roles over the years. But yeah, I love eco living. I love that's kind of turned into my niche really, because I like everything natural and holistic as much as possible. But I kind of refer to myself as being a realistic green person, or a realistic environmentalist, in that it's not always affordable, it's not always possible to make all the right green choices. However, what I want to do with my brand is get people to think more, and that's why my focus is kind of promoting what I call conscious consumerism, because it's just about getting people to just not mindlessly buy stuff, which I think is a culture which has grown and grown and grown. It's about getting people to think, well, how can I make some of the right decision with this purchase? And I think that's something that everyone can do. And I genuinely believe that everyone doing a little will make a big difference. So that's kind of what I'm all about, really.
Yeah. I definitely see it in the community a lot, that you don't have to go all in. Like you can just start out slow, and it's really, I think it's really helpful that it's not so overwhelming if you've never been into it or anything. So it's
and I think this is part of the movement becoming mainstream as well. I think this is the exciting thing about it, is that historically speaking, environmentalism was kind of almost seen as a bit of a hippy dippy tree hugging culture. Like the kind of people, like, I don't know what it's like where you live, but for us in the UK, you kind of, the Green Party would come out with statements like, oh, everyone should get rid of their cars. And I'm just like, well, that's not practical, is it? You know? Because actually going from horse and cart to car was a progression in that people suddenly were able to travel anywhere in quite a short period of time. And whilst you should make kind of decisions, like especially I think, and I hope the pandemic, a positive thing that will come out of the pandemic, for people will think, you know, do I physically need to go to a different city to have that meeting now, or can I do it via Zoom? And I hope that that will be a positive thing that comes out of it. And again, that's about being conscious, and it's about questioning your decisions, not just with purchases, but with business decisions as well. But yeah, I think as it's becoming a more mainstream concept, and I really feel like it has been growing from the ground up during the pandemic, especially, that people are really starting to understand that we are on the brink of needing to make changes in our individual lives, which will make a difference. And I think people are getting more engaged with that, and I think that's really positive. And I think I like that whole piece around celebrating the changes, the small changes, the, you know, monthly eco swaps and stuff like that. And just that side of things is definitely, to me, the way forward.
Yeah. So so have you always thought about these things? I mean, when?
I think so. I mean, I think, you know, my mum definitely was very much into that side of things when I was growing up. She always taught us about recycling, about trying to be green, about loving nature, about viewing our body as a temple. Though she wasn't into yoga or anything, it was always kind of like, respect your body. You know, you've only got one, you should be putting natural things into it. And then there were circumstantial things, like my sister suffered with eczema growing up. So we naturally had a more natural diet because she couldn't have additives in her diet and all the E numbers and stuff like that. So I think, for, you know, I was born in 1983, so grew up in the 80s and 90s when there was a lot of chemically bright pink stuff in food. And but we didn't really have any of that in our house because of my sister, so that I guess that developed a more natural palate for me. And actually I've always found that I can't really stomach things like fast food as a result, you know. On the rare occasion, but you know, my mum cooked very traditional food. She cooked quite plain food, but that was because that's what British food was at the time. And I feel like it's my generation who started introducing spices and flavours from different cultures, really, in the UK. But the whole thing of trying to grow some of your own food, that was very much part of our family, and trying to buy the best food you could as well. Like, food was very much a priority. And equally so, when it came to buying clothes, Mum was always about buying cotton stuff rather than artificial fabrics. Of course, now we find that, you know, non-organic cotton isn't actually the best, but it's probably still a lot better than polyester. So things like that. And then I guess, you know, things like I was the youngest of three, and my mum would always keep my sister's clothes in the loft and get them down, and we'd go through them, and we'd have like a big clothes swapping party kind of thing, and she'd make it fun. So I guess that sort of thing was like seeds of ideas planted from a young age. Yeah.
So
how about you?
I've always also had these thoughts. I haven't really acted on them before, but I've always known it's something I want to do something about. I grew up in Greenland, so early on we knew that something was going on. Like it had an impact on the environment. But I haven't
see
really
the weather changing and
yeah, exactly,
and the seasons changing.
Yeah, but I really like making websites and the startup world. And every time I had a new idea, I wanted to implement something that would change the world for the better. And that's how I ended up with making Mælt. Putting it out
wonderful.
there. Yeah. Thank you.
And I think it's great. It's a great piece of software. I mean, I think we should take a moment for you to actually describe what it is, to be honest, to share with our audiences.
Yeah. So Mælt is, we want to inspire people that to have an impact on the world, to do something positive, not only for the world, but also for people or animals or anything that's positive. So the first thing we do is we have a profile you can have where you can put all your links to your Instagram and Facebook and your YouTube videos, and then you can just send it to people and say, hey, you can find all my stuff here. And with that profile, you plant 5 trees every month. And every time you invite people and they start planting trees, you also get trees from them. So it's kind of like a social media of planting trees.
Absolutely. So this is something which you can obviously use in your bio link on Instagram, which is really great system. I mean, before I met you through all the eco meetups, I was using Linktree, which does a similar thing, but without all the eco benefits.
Yeah, exactly.
So I really would encourage you, if you're into the environment, people, get on board, use this app. Because it's
thank you. So I always think about if there's something we have now, how can we make it better? How can we implement doing things better and helping the world at the same time, especially for helping the mindset behind startups is really how can we grow really fast, grow really big really fast. So I wanted to take that train of thought and put it into doing good at the same time. So how can we grow big and do a lot of good things at the same time? Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
that's great. I think that's 100% the way forward. So tell me, just for layman's people like me, how does your app actually work? How does it end up planting a tree? Because I always wonder about these things which say for whatever action you end up planting a tree. How does that actually come about?
Yeah. So you buy a subscription. It's $5 a month, and then you plant 5 trees. And we've partnered up with the Eden Reforestation projects. They plant millions of trees around the world every year, and that's what they do. So companies can go to them and say, oh, we want, every time someone buys a t-shirt from us, we want to plant 5 trees. So that's what they do, and we partnered up with them, and they're really great. They make sure that
we'll have to include the link to them in the blurb at the bottom.
Yeah.
Because hopefully other startups could collaborate with them too, maybe.
Yeah, and you can actually read more about it if you go to your link, JamJarGill link in bio. At the bottom you can read more, and it will say everything where it's planted and everything. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, but to get back to you, so you had all these thoughts all your life, and when did you decide that, okay, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna write a blog and put it out there? Like when was that, and why did it come about?
So the reason why I ended up starting that original recipe journal blog was after watching a film which kind of changed my life at the time, which was called Julia and Julie. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
But it's basically a film which is set in 2 timelines. So one of the timelines is following Julia Childs, who you may or may not have heard of, but she was the American woman who brought French cooking to America. And then you're also following someone who is works in the government in America just after 9/11, who's taking all the telephone calls of all the families who lost people in 9/11. So I probably watched it very, very soon after it came out, which was probably the early 2000s. And basically, because they're both originally in dead-end government jobs, Julia Childs is following her husband who works with the government and gets posted all over the world. And it was the 1950s, so the wife just followed wherever the husband went. And then the modern lady, she's just in this dead-end job, it's really depressing. She's taking all these phone calls all day. And Julia Childs finds herself in Paris, and she actually signs up to train at the Cordon Bleu, which you may have heard of. I'd heard of it anyway. It's like the French cook school. And I think she was one of the first women to study there, and she had to really fight for her place. And then she went on to write this cookery book, which ended up, long story later, becoming very famous and making her very famous in America. And what the modern Julie decides to do is take this book and cook her way through it and blog about it as a creative project, so that she has something interesting going on in her life, which is less depressing, and it's something which she can take ownership of. And I think why I found it also relatable is because after you come out of university, you quite often think, oh, you know, I'm going to find an amazing job and stuff, but quite often you end up in a bit of a dead-end admin job where you just question, you know, is this what life has to offer, kind of thing. And it's all about kind of taking ownership back, I guess. It made me think, oh, well, hey, you know, just because you are doing that for your job doesn't mean that has to be your life. You know, it can be, you can have other creative outlets. And I dabbled around with various things up to that point. I'd been a hospital radio presenter, and, you know, done a few other things. I'd been a leader for the Girl Guides, as well as a voluntary position. Both of those things I really enjoyed, but you kind of got to the end of doing it for a year and it kind of turned into a lot of effort on top of work. So I guess I was on the hunt for finding something a bit different to do as well. And I just thought, hey, you know, if she can do it, I can do it. And that's what got me started on blogging, really. So it was quite in the early days of it being a concept, really. And I just kind of went from there. And it, you know, for many years, I just did it very sporadically, just when I had time. And then I got to that certain point, I think, you know, round about when I was planning the wedding as well, just because, you know, clearly I didn't have enough on my plate. I then decided to get a bit more serious with the blog as well and start to think about, like, hey, do I want this to be part of my working life as well? Do I want this to turn into something more than just a hobby? So decided to buy my own URL, rent my own URL and get away from being .wordpress.org. And just that's kind of grown organically from there, really. And I've just been learning as I've gone along. But yeah, I feel like I'm in a really exciting space with it now. And I think as I'm launching as a VA, it's feeling more and more like the combination of maybe being a VA and being a blogger influencer could potentially be a combination of my sole income at some point in the not too distant future, hopefully.
Exciting, yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked about a brand before. So how much content do you make? Like, what different kind of content do you have?
Yeah, so basically, I think the key in what I've learned sort of through the process is that it's about committing to a certain regularity which you can stick to in terms of content. So that's why it was kind of, once I got over the tidal wave of having twins a little bit and life settled down a bit, I decided to retake up Meatless Monday. I'd done it before the boys, and then when I got sort of late pregnant, I just crave meat when I crave meat. So I didn't want that limitation on my diet. I just wanted to be able to, you know, eat what I wanted to eat when I wanted to eat. And that sort of led into the first 2 years of having them as well, when you have no sleep. And it's like much like, I don't know, I have that philosophy with food. I've never been a dieter. So I just kind of like, I'm very much a bit of what you fancy does you good kind of person when it comes to food. And equally so, if you're feeling a bit ropey or a bit under the weather, then you should be allowed to eat what you want to eat. So I kind of gave it up at that point, and then got back into doing it and got back on the eco agenda probably a couple of years after having them. And that then gave me a template to use as a weekly blog post, which I then, you know, that developed in itself from being not just about what we were eating that day. I then had, you know, my week in 4 photos, what had been in my ears as I was getting into podcasts, into audiobooks, what I'd been watching on TV as I wanted to share that as well, and what we were wearing to promote sort of secondhand clothes and stuff, because that's something which is very dear to my heart too, and also helps with that same agenda. So I basically, even though I've given up Meatless Mondays as a blog post, I'm carrying it on in actual, like I am doing that in my life, but I just kind of felt like it was actually after a conversation with an SEO guy where he just said to me, you know, Google probably just thinks you write about Meatless Monday and nothing else. And I was just like, okay, yeah, you know, I need to diversify a bit. So I've kind of like decided this year I'm going to just do different blog posts each week. And so I basically commit to doing, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, so please feel free to edit this down. But basically I do 1 blog post a week. I do, and then I have an RSS feed email, which kind of automatically shares that. So I do a little blurb at the top. But again, as of this year, I've changed the dynamic because I was doing a full newsletter each week as well, but I kind of felt that was going to be too much, so I've had to adapt and diversify this year as I'm trying to fit in the VA work as well. So now I've got 1 blog post a week and doing a summary email kind of thing once a month now, and then having the RSS feed email every week. And then obviously I'm on Instagram a lot as well, and I've now run 2 meetups on there, so that has worked to it as well. I guess the one piece which I haven't really figured out a regularity with, but I know I need to, is my vlog on YouTube, so that's another thing as well. But it's all just constantly like gradually progressing. And I guess the interesting thing about now launching as a VA is I'm learning how other people run their influencer businesses, and I'm starting to see, actually, if I want to take this to the next level, I need to have a plan. I need to write a plan, and I need to stick to that plan, and, you know, do all that. So that's kind of the next thing, rather than kind of flying by the seat of my pants, which is what I've been doing up until this point.
Yeah, okay, because that's what I wanted to ask next. With so many different things, like how do you decide what to do? But it sounds like you actually have, like, I'm gonna do this every Monday, I'm gonna do Wednesday, like it's all really planned, it sounds like.
It's all in my head though. At this point. So I kind of like in my head, I go, okay, you know, I know now I've got this RSS feed email going out on a Monday first thing. So I need to make sure between when that goes out and the following Monday, there's a blog post. So it doesn't actually, in theory, matter which day that blog post happens now. So that reduces the pressure a little bit, because obviously when I'm doing Meatless Monday, every Sunday night was super stressful, because it was always like, oh, I haven't done it. Yeah, and like all the other things piling up for the week, and then the kids going to school and me going to work, and then I'd have a bad night's sleep. So actually, this new strategy for 2021 is already working for me better, because rather than, it's finding that balance with planning. I think when you've got a busy life and you're trying to develop a entrepreneurial side hustle, it's finding a way to do it in such a way that you're creating regularity for your followers, but at the same time, you're not putting huge pressure on yourself to stick rigidly to a plan. So the whole fact that I basically have a week's window to get a blog post out now, I would suggest that's a good way forward, because you still are doing it regularly, you're still doing it weekly, but it doesn't have to be on a set day each week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you like most about being an influencer? And
there's lots of things, actually. I think because I'm naturally a people person, I love that aspect. You know, the live which I did yesterday, which you can find on my Instagram, it was all about building community, and how great it is to build a community with people, like-minded people. And honestly, it gives me such a buzz that I'm talking to people all over the world, and meeting such interesting people. I absolutely love, that's one of my top things. Also testing products which, you know, I mean, sometimes it's a case that I couldn't necessarily afford them myself, but having the opportunity to test stuff which is eco, to help promote it, and to feel much like what you were saying previously, doing good in the world with what you have. I think that's something which is absolutely a goal of mine, and to help small businesses as well. And I love the whole working with entrepreneurs and being an entrepreneur myself and developing that piece as well, because I just feel like it's such a nurturing community of people who just want to help each other. And you know, very much an advocate for this whole collaboration over competition piece. Yeah, so I guess those are kind of my favorite things, really. And I guess the hope that, you know, I will be at some point able to leave the corporate world and go out on my own and enjoy developing and creating, you know, this brand going forward. And the exciting thing about that is it can develop with me. I've created such a brand, to me, which will develop with my life. So it's not the kind of niche where I'm only writing about having kids, and then once they've grown, then I won't have anything to write about. So I think that is something to just be aware of. If you choose to do that, by all means, that's fine. And if you don't want to write anymore once your kids are grown, then fine. But if it is something where you enjoy being an influencer or you enjoy being a blogger, then try and develop it in such a way that, you know, it's not purely about the one point in your life you're in. So it's not just about your wedding, or it's not just about, I mean, I'm using examples from my own life. It's not just about your house. It's not just about your kids. I think it's quite sensible to have something where it's a little bit more generalistic, but it has a general theme. And that's kind of where I've got to it now. And that's what excites me, is that, you know, it ends up being holistic and eco and stuff in that space. You know, that can develop my whole life. I could carry this on my whole life if I wanted to. And I think that's what's so exciting about it.
It's really interesting also that you really see the big picture, It sounds really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to follow you. But also, I also want to talk about like, what challenges do you face being an influencer and making all this content? I could imagine like some days you just don't want to do it, or how?
I guess sometimes when I feel like it's a chore, I just then think, well, no, but this is the most important thing to me, really. I think it's true that when you find something that you do which you love, it doesn't feel like a chore. So I've never felt like it's enough of a chore for me not to do it, if that makes sense. So I think that's testament to the fact that it is something which I genuinely do enjoy.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the thing is that I've made it wide enough. Again, it stretches across different mediums, and, you know, maybe I'll do a podcast one day. That's the joy of it as well, is that, you know, it can develop into different spaces, into different mediums. I started a blog, you know, last summer, and I'm starting as a VA. So it's always stuff that can develop from it. And like, even within the VA space, like, I'd really like to, as I make more money, put some of that money aside to do training and to develop myself further. And for example, stuff like graphic design, I'd really like to learn some of that skill set. I'd really like to know a bit more about video editing. I'd really actually randomly as well, at some point in my future, I'd like to train as a yoga teacher as well. Which again fits into the brand, into the space. And that's what's so lovely about it, is I think that's what makes it not boring, because every time something feels a little bit like it's got a bit stale in content, using that example of Meatless Mondays for me, you know, I was 2 years into that, honestly feeling like, oh, okay, you know, I'm writing the same templated stuff each week. It's slightly different, but it got to the point where it didn't feel like it was different enough to justify continuing that. So I moved on and I developed that into a different direction, and that's fine. And that's a great thing about it. Yeah.
Great. So if there's anybody listening to this that also want to be an influencer on brand or something like that, what would your suggestion, if you were to start today from scratch, what would you focus on? What would you be the first thing that you do?
I think one of the best things to do is find people to look up to, find what I would call online mentors. So you have different kind of mentors in life. You have mentors who you know and who you genuinely talk to, and that's great if you have those. But there's also a category which are just as dear to me, which is a concept I actually got from one of mine, Rachel Hollis. She said, like, create some online mentors, find people who inspire you, people who you look at what they're doing, and they can be huge people. I mean, both for her and for I love Oprah Winfrey. And so, you know, follow her. I follow Melinda Gates, since I read her books. I follow Arianna Huffington. I follow, you know, Elizabeth Gilbert. And all these people inspire me. All these people, you know, they just give me light, and they make me, I think, try and find things which just make you feel happy and make you, excite you about the subject area. And start there. Start by finding people who do that and see what they're doing. And it's not a case of copying what they're doing. It's a case of using them as inspiration to work out what you want to do and how you want to put your message out there. And then you end up almost developing a tapestry of like, okay, so how do I want to do this? How can I break this down? And I don't know, like, I think, for example, the whole Meatless Monday thing, or having a regular thing to write about, is a really good way to get started, because, you know, that's just one example of a weekly thing which you can do. But regardless of your genre, if you find something like that which you can become a part of a movement which is bigger than you, to do it regularly, that's a really good starting point, because one of the key things is to have regularity to your content. So if you can only blog once a month, even if you know that you will blog once a month, then you can say, this is my monthly update. So start thinking about, what could I write about that with that frequency, you know? And I'd say your monthly would be your limit. You wouldn't want to go wider than that, otherwise people just won't follow you. Ideally weekly or bi-weekly is ideal, but then if monthly is what you can fit into your life, then do that. And just maybe start, if blogs are your thing, then start with WordPress, just regular, unpaid, see how that goes, do that for a year, and then maybe decide to buy a URL, and then, you know, always be trying to build a community. I personally think Instagram is my favorite of the platforms, but then people might have more of an affiliation with different ones depending on what their subject area is. So I would kind of say that maybe what's worked for me is to have the blog as my bread and butter, and I'm doing that always in the background, and then maybe focus on one of the social media outlets as your key one, and you can share on the others as well. But, you know, some people prefer Twitter, some people prefer Facebook, some people prefer Instagram, some people prefer TikTok. So maybe try and find one of those, focus in on that, and focus in on regular content on your blog, and just try, I guess, to make a plan, which is still something I'm working on 10 plus years in. Yeah. To actually work out what you're going to do before you're going to do it. Is that good? Good answer?
Yeah, it's a good. I mean, yeah. I guess that's what you did. I mean, so yeah. It works.
Yeah.
And to finish off, because Mælt is a software company, yeah. If we could make anything, any software to help you solve one of your problems, what should it be? What solution should we make for you?
I do have a dream of an app one day, which has been developing in my head, so I might come back to you at some point. Okay. You want to hear my dream of an app?
Definitely.
Okay, so my dream of an app is having a planner organizer app, which includes a gratitude journal within it. And it's something which actually doesn't seem to be on the market yet. So basically, again, as I was doing a refresh and trying to think about ways forward for this year, I stumbled across a app which is beautiful. It's a beautiful app. And basically the premise of it is it takes the prettiness of a paper planner, and it puts it digitally and syncs it with Google, which is great in theory. And it had like a really nice thing like a water count, and like where you ticked off like how many glasses of water you drank that day and stuff. But unfortunately the functionality wasn't quite there for me, because whilst my homeware lifestyle blog, which I had, which ran alongside the recipe blog, my homestyle lifestyle blog was called Practical Beautiful. And this is like the thing which I love in life, is I love something to be both practical and beautiful. That's my ideal, is to have both at the same time. And so this was it's beautiful, but when you click into the individual item on your calendar, then it opens in edit mode. It doesn't open it in extended view mode. And so you couldn't then click on, say, the location and link to Google Maps or whatever, which is what I'm used to doing in Google Calendar. It just literally opens it so you can edit it. And I was like, well, that's not going to work. And that was the thing which ended up being, oh, well, I can't use that anymore. So now I've, and then I've got a gratitude app. I was using a gratitude journal, paper written to begin with. I'm a big advocate of like keeping a gratitude journal daily. It's really, really good for your mental health. And especially at the moment with the pandemic and everything. But to use one digitally is brilliant. But then it's surprising how on the market at the moment, if you want something which you can access in your browser as well as on your phone, then you have to pay some ridiculous subscription fee. And there's always a glitch and stuff in it. So I've actually found one which you pay just one fee up front for both the desktop one and for the regular app. But yeah, I mean, it's okay. It is great. But it'd be great if it was part of the same app.
Yeah,
if you see what I mean. So I'd like it to be, I like the functionality of several apps. I'd like to amalgamate them is what I'm saying. So you would have something which is as pretty as that journal, with the functionality to have a gratitude section without limitations on things like how many photos you can add and how many attachments you can add. But also it also has a tracker to show your day and show events like I've got this meeting at this time and here's the Zoom link, and have all the practicality of that. So I'd like it to be an all-in-one.
But why is that important to have like your planner and the gratitude in the same app? What does that do?
Because I just don't see why should you have to have all these separate apps. Like I just want an all-in-one where I can just, yeah, it just would be nice to have everything all in one, I think.
Yeah.
But, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's a pipe dream at the moment, but yeah, one day maybe.
Yeah, I actually made a gratitude app at one point called JamJarGill. Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
You could write in your how much joy you had that day.
Oh, nice.
And it was only positive things, like you couldn't write negative things. So you really had to think, if you didn't have a great day, you really have to think about, oh my God, I have to find something.
That's what it's all about, because I'm a big believer. I don't know if you've ever read the book The Secret, but the whole premise of what you focus on gets bigger. So even if you've had the shittest of shit days, everyone has 5 things they can be grateful for. Yeah, and you should always aim to write those 5 things down. And I like to do it to end my day. So even if I'm exhausted and going to bed super late, if I sit there and go, actually, you know, I've had really nice food today. I've been able to drive a car and it's been reliable. Yeah. You know, all these little things.
Exactly.
And I think the thing is, if people don't know where to begin, I always refer to, I don't know if you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Have you heard of that?
No.
So I'll send you a link to it, but it's basically, he came up with this concept of what human beings need in order to survive. And so you start with the basics. And actually, I've got really into, one of my goals for 2021 is to master meditation. And I'm using the Calm app to do that. And there's a really nice gratitude meditation to go to sleep with. And she kind of talks you through as you're lying there. She's like, you know, be thankful for the fact you woke up in a house this morning.
Yeah.
And the roof kept you dry, and that you were able to have a shower and it was nice and hot. and it cleanses your body. And then you have a TV so you can be entertained. And like, these are things which are just day-to-day things, which I think if you don't get into the practice of gratitude journaling, there's so many things we take for granted, and it's a really negative part of human culture. And it's so important to take a step back, you know, regularly in your life and go, wow, you know, how lucky am I? How lucky am I? I mean, there was something, it's just reminded me actually, which I saw at the beginning of the lockdown last year, which completely blew my mind, where, because everyone was struggling mentally at the beginning of that. And it was actually a doctor in India who posted this thing, which then went viral. And it said, being able to go into lockdown is a privilege.
Yeah.
And it's just listed all this stuff and just how it wasn't possible for the vast majority of people in India. And I was just like, wow, you know. And I think, you know, it's so important to look at those things and to really take on board those things and really genuinely understand how lucky you are. Not to the point where you are feeling guilty about it, because I don't think that's the right way to handle it. It's actually something which Rachel Hollis is a big advocate for, and she's like a preacher's daughter and she's Christian, and this line I believe comes from the Bible, even though I'm not religious, but it's something, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's, for those who are given a lot is expected. And I think that is the thing that we should all try and do and be mindful of, is like, okay, so we've got these things, we've got the skill sets, let's do good with that. Let's try and be good in the world that we're in and try and promote the good. And that's what we have the power to do.